Good morning, everyone. I am Rolf Arnold Lasco Jr., Ruben P. Job Professor of Spiritual Formation and Pastoral Theology here at Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary. And thank you for joining us today. G-Talk is a space for soulful conversation, we hope. And it's about engaging in God talk in a manner that is personal, practical, embodied, and open-ended. For these months at G-Talk, we are privileged to have Dr. Kate Ott, Jerry L. and Mary Joy Stead Professor of Christian Social Ethics and Director of the Stead Center for Ethics and Values. Dr. Ott is the author of Christian Ethics for a Digital Age, Sex and Faith, Talking to Your Child from Birth to Adolescence, and Sex, Tact, and Faith, Christian Ethics for a Digital Age that just came out this year, if I'm not mistaken, among others. And for this edition of G-Talk, Dr. Ott will talk about technology and spirituality. Quite a combination, isn't it? And we hope that her reflection on this topic will open up conversation at home, your church, other relational spaces, and that through it, we will all get a glimpse of the myriad ways we experience the divine intersecting with our quotidian life. Dr. Ott, this digital space is yours.
Technology and spirituality. We will eventually focus on digital technology because I know that's what we all think of when we hear the word technology these days. But honestly, that's a newish experience as we think about technology and spirituality. Let's take a moment to think about technology a little bit more broadly. Technology could be at least three things as we use that word. It could be things that are manufactured or made, right? Devices, artifacts, software. Um, it's also the knowledge and plans in how to make those artifacts, right? The technology behind the technology. And then lastly, and probably most importantly for us thinking about technology and spirituality, it's also the attitudes or cultures that accompany those first two, the way in which the technology we use to build something and the artifact that it becomes, how that changes us. And so that's thinking about the attitudes and cultures that go into the creative process, but also that change us as we interact with that technology. So before we jump to phones and social media and anything related to digital technology, let's take a step back and think about another major technological change in our religious traditions. So we know that religious life was dramatically affected by the printing press and the rise in literacy of everyday lay folks. It even expanded the clergy. So if your spirituality is biblically rooted, can you imagine your spirituality without having ever read scripture? No ability to hold the text in your hand, to study the book in its totality. Uh, I teach 7th and 8th grade Sunday school, and we spend a lot of time locating scriptural passages, right? Is it in Christian scriptures, Hebrew scriptures? How do you know the difference between chapter and verse? How do you find that in the Bible? Well, I'm pretty sure that the students think this is generally a waste of their time because they can simply put book, chapter, verse into a search window and it will pull up 20 translations for them. But what does this mean as we think about our spirituality? Colleague John Dyer has a new book coming out called People of the Screen: How Evangelicals Created the Digital Bible and How It Shapes Their Reading of Scripture. And I'm really looking forward to reading this text. I mean, ask yourself, how does the technology of a book that contains scriptural stories, so one, in order to create it, right, the process of that happening, which is a technology, the choices that people made go into that affects your spirituality now. How we choose to use that text, how it culturally shapes different Christian traditions, Jewish traditions, other religious communities that are of particular sacred texts. That technology shapes how they understand their spirituality. And now moving away from the text, from the book, maybe not the text, but from the book, from the totality of the text bound together, opens up new ways of experiencing scripture and spirituality related to that. So, this is just one example of how technology over hundreds of years has affected key parts of some people's spirituality. This is not exactly what we might call techno spirituality because many people have sort of, you know, let go of the idea that book is technology, even though it is, and language is as well. But when we think of techno spiritualities, we think of digital technology now. It's a term used to describe spiritual expressions or exercises that are carried out using digital technologies. So, for example, I regularly start my day with reading the meditations of Cole Arthur Riley, known as the Black Liturgist on Instagram. She often posts a quote from a Black theologian, artist, literary writer, and then provides a breathing meditation to use while one thinks about this quote, while one meditates and studies it. Now, I also regularly turn to the work of queer theological collective. It's called Infleshed, and it's also on Instagram, but you can find it at flesh.com. They provide poetry, prayer, short liturgies for reflection across a variety of social media platforms, but most of their materials found directly on their website. So these would be examples that reinforce this sort of technology plus spirituality understanding. But, or maybe, and I am a spiritual embodied being and I use tools of digital technology, right, my phone, my computer, the software applications that go into making this to engage in spiritual practices. It's a bit like picking up a book, right? I pick up my phone, I go to that site, that page, and I engage in those spiritual practices. So, in a sense, that might lead us to think about technology, especially digital technology, as something totally under our control. It's just a device I choose to use as maybe a complement to my spirituality in ways that I do things offline, or it may be the primary place where I engage in spiritual practices and exercises. But it leads us to really think about technology and spirituality as a well, technology as a tool in relationship to spirituality. Well, technology more generally and digital technology specifically, it has a way of hiding its impact on us in plain sight. And that's one of the ways it hides. It leads us to believe that this is just a thing I'm picking up and I fully control it. I use it in the ways I want to. It's not affecting or changing me. Another theologian thinking about technology and Christian community, Stephen Garner, most notably, his book is written with Heidi Campbell called Network Theology, Negotiating Faith in Digital Culture. That talks more broadly about how our faith practices, our faith communities, religion itself has been changed by digital technology. And he remarks that given our fish like existence in the water of technology, it may be that we have been colonialized by technology as much as we have chosen to adopt it. So it's important to recognize that all technologies, thinking both about that artifact and about the process, the technology by which that artifact is created, are done so out of certain kinds of values, right? We might say, social media is designed out of the value of connecting people. Well, that's true, but it's also designed out of the value of trying to get you to consistently and regularly interact with it. It's designed out of the value to get you to uh, to feel a need for affirmation and popularity through that connection. So sometimes the values something is created with might align with our values, and sometimes they might not align with our values. We might respond by just saying, well, stop using digital technology altogether, right? Their impact on spirituality and our religious practices, we don't know what the outcome is. So just stop, just walk away. That seems unlikely and honestly a bit foolish. Because one, I mean, I really like the way the Black Liturgist Instagram account and inflesh.com deepens my spirituality. It provides a community of people I would never have in my local context. And second, we might not be able to completely understand spirituality if we think we can just leave it behind when we go on digital technology or use it or just exist in the daily technologically saturated lives that we live in. I mean, it's as though one could say, well, I'll only be a spiritual being when I'm not engaging with digital technology. But I mean, the streetlights are run digitally. The surveillance cameras in just about every store or neighborhood you go into, the way you use your credit card, how you register for a doctor's appointment, all of that is digital. We are in digitally saturated lives. We can't escape it. So there's also, you can't just leave your spirituality out of that. And here, I think my colleague Philip Butler, who wrote the book Black Transhuman Liberation Theology, Technology and Spirituality. He's also designed a distinctly Black conversational artificial intelligence with mental health capacities. I think he can really help us understand this shift from technology plus spirituality to an immersive digital spirituality. So he reminds us that spirituality is not some otherworldly escape, but it's actually, yeah, and it's not a move away, say, from ethical action, from caring about the world, right? But in the traditions of writers like Howard Thurman's mysticism and social change, where spiritual practices and our spirituality is I'm going to use the word program just to kind of get us into that digital space, is programmed actually to help us seek clarity, authenticity, grounding. And when I say programmed, I don't mean by, some random external force or in a kind of presets you were created by God and therefore it's there. But in the sense that that's just who we are as people who are relational, as people who are seeking to understand ourselves, each other, and the world. So Butler talks about our spirituality as our code, as a related to kind of an ethical way of being, a way a person is wired and interacts with the world around them. And it's one that's thoroughly digital, regardless of our seeking out, handheld digital connection, for example. So you're watching this talk, right? You might have specifically said, like, I'm going to engage in a digital practice of understanding myself, spirituality, and technology through the medium of digital, audio, visual, human to computer interaction. And while doing this, I will in fact contemplate how this networking of myself with Kate and all the others who have watched this video or might watch this video are connected via the web. But probably that's not the intentionality with which you came to watch this G Talk, to interact with this subject and topic. Again, the technology eludes us. We don't pay attention to what it's doing. Because in fact, we are inescapably spiritually embodied and digital beings now. For me, that means even if I'm not engaging like directly with digital technologies, a device or a software, they've already shaped me. They've already shaped the world around me and my very way of being. Here I can't quite not think like an ethicist. That's why I love the work of theologians like Thurman and Butler, because as I noted, I don't think of spirituality as some otherworldly escape or, transcending the place that we are at. I think those things can happen as part of our practices of spirituality, but they are always grounded in who we are, our histories, our local contexts. And we need to recognize that so is digital technology. So if we let it be this air, this water, this thing we don't see and don't pay attention to, we won't understand either its positive or its negative effects on our spirituality. Because technology is designed to be ubiquitous and unseen, part of our digital spirituality, I firmly believe, needs to be grounded in making the technological aspects of it known, paying attention to how technology, whether that's devices and hardware or apps and software or the systems all around us in society, how they have in some ways become a diversion or a tool of escape rather than one of immersion. So if this is a tool of escape, then from my point of view, it's antithetical to how we're understanding spirituality. If spirituality is meant to locate me, to help me be more rooted, to go deeper, it's about recognizing what's around me. It's about paying attention to the material, even when the digital tries to get me to miss that, to not pay attention to it. So that's why I find work like the Black Liturgist or In Flesh so compelling as a digital spiritual immersion. So when I engage in the meditative practices on Instagram or through the web sharing of Infleshed, I can't do so without my own whiteness or cisgender and heterosexuality being challenged because of how the Black liturgist centers the histories and current realities of people of color, most often Black folks, or how In Flesh disrupts gender and sexual binaries in its use of theological imagination, language, and imagery. But it's not just what these groups say that makes the digital water we swim in visible to the user, right? In that context, that digital technology would have me forget who I am potentially as a historical embodied being. But I can't engage with that technology without bringing my embodiment to it, without bringing my history to it. So, how do these groups then help us understand the digital water that we swim in, make it visible to us as a user, to help us understand how it plays a role in our spirituality? Well, the dominant oppressive social norms, in my experience of Christian spirituality, are disrupted when folks like this use the openness of digital space to challenge the authority of traditional religious leadership. So you might not, in your daily experience, walk into most religious communities and see leadership like, a modern day mystic who is embodied as a, you know, young adult Black woman and is writing this work for us. You might not see the kind of queer, trans, non-binary embodied folks, across racial ethnic groups that comprise the collective of Infleshed, but they can use digital technologies. They can leverage that to create new kinds of religious communities, to give us new spaces. And yet, by doing that, they are specifically showing us, calling our attention to the way that digital technologies break down certain kinds of boundaries of religious authority. Now, they don't just disrupt the digital water in which we swim. They also resist some of the mechanisms of those digital technologies. They resist the use of video and audio, which is really popular on the platforms they use. They critique the pace and productivity narratives of digital technology, right? Sort of leveraging it against itself as a critique. They often take breaks from posting. They invite the user to stop and breathe instead of doom scrolling. They create a community for users through the ways they invite commenting, sharing, providing feedback, even inviting the users to create for themselves or join the collective, for example, in Flash. It's a digital spirituality does not seek to evade our digital spiritual embodiment as people who bring histories and local contexts to our digital lives, but rather it's a digital spirituality that honors those. And, you know, as Thurman might say, they help us to center down in the midst of the chaos of our fast-paced, driven lives. But that centering down is not a forgetting or a leaving of the way the world is structured. It's a way of understanding it better, understanding our place in it, our community's role in it, and our relationship to it as spiritual, digital, embodied people.